Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joe Brennan from CBIA, and I just want to do a brief welcome. Thank you all for attending this webinar today on Working Parents Distance Learning in the Year Ahead. Our team at CBIA, along with our affiliates at ReadyCT and Costa, have been working hard to try to come up with some unique programming, knowing there's an awful lot of webinars out there right now. And I think we've done a great job putting together a great program for you today. As you know, in this day and age, we all wear many hats, and many of you had added a new hat recently, which is a teacher of your children. And that led to all kinds of questions and confusion, and hopefully we can provide some guidance for you here today. And I think there's a great panel of experts that you'll hear from that Shannon Marimón will introduce in a second. Just very briefly on ReadyCT and our affiliation with them. ReadyCT is a wonderful organization that's committed to advancing academic excellence for all children in Connecticut. And we've been partnered for about 3 years now, and Shannon's doing a great job in leading that organization. So she's going to be our moderator today. So with that, I'll thank you again for attending. Hope you enjoy the program, and I'll turn it over to Shannon Marimón.
Thank you, Joe. So I'm so glad to be with our audience today as a CBIA affiliate and a partner in this work generally across the state. I also happen to be a working parent, so this is all too personal for me. In fact, I have ushered my family out the door for a walk, so hopefully there will not be background noise from my 5- and 8-year-old, but that is always a possibility, as I'm sure many of you can relate to. So we're going to be talking about the challenges of working parents of students in grades pre-K up through grade 12. And we're going to have hopefully a very kind of in-depth conversation about how everyone is kind of thinking about navigating this very new reality. But some housekeeping attendees, if you have joined a recent CBIA webinar, you know that this is an opportunity to share your challenges and concerns and to consult with expert panelists, which we have with us today. And hopefully they can help with finding solutions that ease frustration and uncertainty about your child's learning in the near and long term. We'll also explore to some extent what your child's classroom learning might look like come fall. So logistically, if you want to use the Q&A function located in the middle of your screen to submit your feedback and questions at any time throughout the webinar, my colleague Cheryl McNamee will be reviewing questions as they come in, and we'll raise them with the panelists towards the end of the hour. And as a disclaimer, since education in a COVID-19 climate is ever evolving, there may not be yet answers to every question that comes up, but there will certainly hopefully be steps towards those answers worth discussing. And also, you may have experiences and input to help find solutions. So if that's the case, please don't hesitate to chime in. And a final housekeeping note, the session is being recorded and will be posted both on the readyct.org and cbia.com websites. So without further ado, let's turn to our panel introductions. I'll introduce our 3 panelists and ask each of them to make some brief introductory remarks to talk about what they individually will be bringing to this particular conversation. So to start, Jonathan Costa is the Assistant Executive Director of EdAdvance. EdAdvance is one of 6 regional educational service centers, or RESCs, in the state that provides support broadly to our school systems. And Jonathan can bring attendees up to speed on the role RESCs play in Connecticut public education. So hello, Jonathan, and thanks for being here.
Hi, Shannon. Thank you so much for having me. I'd like to thank CBIA and ReadyCT for really providing this opportunity to share information with the general public. We're happy to help if we can. For those of you who don't know about regional centers, Connecticut has 6 regional educational service centers that were created in the 1960s by the legislature. Our main role is to provide services to our member districts and their communities. Our boards of directors are made up of your local Board of Education members, and we work directly with our schools and their communities, and sometimes on behalf of the State Department of Education to help deliver services throughout the state of Connecticut. And we're happy to be here today.
Thank you, Jonathan. Fran Rabinowitz is the Executive Director of the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents and a very seasoned education leader who is widely sought by Connecticut lawmakers and practitioners to help inform education policy and practice. In the spirit of full disclosure, I'm happy to share that Fran is a member of the ReadyCT Board of Directors, so we work very closely together on a number of fronts. So hello, Fran, and glad you could join us.
Hi, thank you, Shannon. Want to echo Jonathan's thanks to CBIA and Ready Connecticut. I think the more dialogue we can have with our stakeholders, most especially our families, about this situation that they find themselves in with their children, I think the better it is. I think we need to hear their concerns. I represent the superintendents in the state, and one of the things that has been good during this period is I'm Zooming meetings with them all the time. So I see probably 100 or most superintendents every week on these Zoom calls, and really understand what is going on in the districts. I also am part of the Reopen Connecticut committee to talk about the summer school planning and fall planning. So what I think I can bring here today is what we're thinking about in terms of how we might best make education work going forward. And I'm pleased to be here with all of you today.
Thank you, Fran. And then our third panelist joining us is Justina Schlund. She serves as the Director of Field Learning at the National Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, who 15 years ago also began working in education as an education reporter. She's taught in the classroom, worked in high-level administration, and now works in social emotional learning, SEL for short. Thank you, Justina, for making the time to participate today.
Thanks, Shannon, and so glad to be here. Would just add that I'm also a parent of two who are outside these doors right now too, so you might hear some of that screaming in the background. If you're not familiar with CASEL, we're a 25-year-old nonprofit organization that really has been working to build the field of social and emotional learning, or SEL, and we do this through research, through policy, and by supporting practitioners across the nation. And just a very quick primer on SEL, in case you're not as familiar. We think of SEL as how throughout our lives we learn the skills, the mindsets, the knowledge that really help us understand sort of who we are, express and manage our emotions, show empathy, build relationships, and make decisions that really benefit our families, our communities, and ourselves. And unless you think SEL is sort of kind of the soft, nice to have pieces of education, 25 years of rigorous research has shown that SEL is really connected directly to academic achievement and long-term success. So we really think SEL is a fundamental part of both a high-quality education and particularly important right now as we transition into this really unprecedented, new school year, unprecedented world that we're in. So thanks for having us.
Thank you, Justina. So great. So let's get right to it. We've got a lot of questions that we kind of filtered through parents, working parents, and put together for the panelists. And then, like I said, we'll be collecting questions through the chat feature. So please continue to add to the chat box. But to get started, Justina, I think especially just having heard that foundation around what social emotional learning represents, obviously the conversations on this topic of distance learning and the future of school are taking place everywhere, pretty universally. And after all is said and done, most conversations do hone in on the state of well-being of our young people, and especially the socialization or lack thereof. And when schools reopen in the fall, in whatever form that takes, students will have been separated from formal in-school learning for going on months. Can you speak to the impact of that and what parents need to know in response to that reality?
Yeah, great question. So I mean, I think as you mentioned, right, like we've all had a shared experience with this pandemic, which I think in many respects has been universally difficult, universally stressful. But I think just to start off, it's really important to emphasize that the impact that this has on every child is going to be very different, right? Like it's going to be unique depending on their individual circumstances, who they have access to, their family, their community, as well as where they are developmentally. So I think for parents and caregivers, what's really important to pay attention to are your children's developmental needs, and also building an understanding of, I said in the beginning, right, SEL is a process that really relies on supportive adults like yourself. And that means that you have a really big role to play in helping your children learn how to navigate this challenging time. So, for example, young children right now, where they are developmentally, they're really beginning to understand emotional expressions and situations, and they're really looking to adults to react to say, is the world right now a scary place or a safe place? And this is also the age when kids are really learning those emotional regulation skills, which are going to be particularly critical as we're facing a lot of change that we're dealing with. So I think parents can play a huge role for young children right now in modeling and teaching them strategies for first understanding and then learning how to manage big emotions. And as children get older and they kind of move into that adolescent age in the elementary, late elementary and middle school years, they're still feeding off these cues from adults. But as anyone who has middle schoolers know, right, like they have kind of lots of complex emotions and potential mood swings, and they have their own in-depth thoughts and feelings about what's going on in the world. They're also increasingly kind of attached to their peers and their friends, which makes social distancing particularly challenging. So I think for this age group, you may want to pay particular attention to feelings of loneliness and isolation, and they may feel nervous about returning to school and whether the friendships they'll have will still be there, where they'll fit into the social dynamics. So I think for these kids, it's really important to help them come up with creative ways to connect or reconnect with their friends throughout the summer. And also you can be asking your schools about how they'll start off the year with opportunities for relationship building, for a sense of closure, etc. And then lastly, I think for our oldest kind of age group, those high school years, they're continuing to develop these deep relationships with their peers, but they're also really getting this kind of greater sense of their own identity and their identity as it relates to the groups that they fit in. So they're looking to how they fit in this world, right? And the world right now is sort of, there's a lot going on, right? Not just the pandemic, but the social unrest and conversations about race and racism. And so I think for teenagers, it is particularly important for supportive adults in their lives to be having open conversations with them about how they're processing the world and current events and how it connects to their own racial, social, cultural identities. So I'll stop there, but.
No, that was really helpful. I wonder if, and again, I want to step back also and say that while I may direct questions at specific panelists, if any of the other panelists want to jump in and add something, please feel free. I want this to hopefully feel as much like a conversation as it can be, despite the technical distance between us. But Justina, I do wonder if you have an example, kind of a specific example of something particularly innovative or creative that has transcended the social divide that exists physically, and maybe just an example of what you've seen that's worked particularly well.
Sure. I mean, I think, I don't know if things are particularly innovative, but I think we've seen lots of different examples right now of how technology is being used to connect with kids at, you know, I said kind of that middle school age group is a particular time of social connections, things like that. So I think we've seen a lot of, you know, new use of social media with teachers who haven't used social media, particularly as a platform, or others who are building those connections with kids and kind of meeting them where they're at. I think there's also, particularly now in this moment of time, there's a lot of conversations that are going on between kids and teenagers about what it means to be a particular race, or what it means to be part of a world of a pandemic. And so we've seen a lot of work around kind of helping them express outlets through journaling or artwork or music and things like that.
Great, thank you. And again, if participants on the call have examples too, and we're happy to also share resources to links that we might want to promote with the broader audience. Just share that through the chat feature. So moving to Fran, you've been part of, as you mentioned already, several state level conversations regarding kind of the logistical reopening of schools and the things that need to be considered, which are many. And as someone who once led one of the state's largest school systems, Bridgeport Public Schools, you're obviously very well aware of the operational challenges districts are facing right now. So any insight that you can provide on how Connecticut Public Schools will be operating in the fall, and can parents expect more distance learning in their future?
Thank you, Shannon. And what I would say to you, and I'm looking at the chat as well, I think this is a very difficult time for families and for educators. There's a lot of ambiguity, and I wish I could wipe that ambiguity out right now. If I had a magic wand, I would, because I think ambiguity is hard to deal with. We're very used to schools being, 8:30 to 3, and you get on the bus and you come home and you do your homework and you go back the next day. And life is turned upside down right now, and it was turned upside down very quickly. And so we're all struggling to find the best way. And as my friend reminds me all the time, perfect is the opposite of, or the enemy of good. And so we're working to find the best way to provide optimum learning for all of our children. And as Justina said, the foundation of that has to be the mental health and social and emotional development of our kids, but also of the families. So let me begin by saying that we know that when schools open in August of 2020, they will not be opening in the same way they opened in 2019. I need to put that on the table right now. I mean, I don't believe that all students will come back to school in the way they did. I do believe that distance learning will continue to be a part of school programs. And I know there are many concerns about distance learning. And I would say to you that we were thrust into this in almost overnight. And I think teachers have done a marvelous job, along with school leaders, of trying to make it very meaningful for kids. But with that said, I would also say to you that there is great variance in how it is being done. And that will not continue. We will establish standards on how much in-person and how the actual distance learning takes place. I prefer to call it blended learning, in person and distance. Do I believe kids will come back to school? Yes. I just don't know exactly how they will come back. I think we can bank on the fact that there will be social distancing. I think there will not be full classrooms coming back. It may be on staggered schedules. I can tell you what I'm hoping for, and then we can take it from there. It's not a plan, but I'm hoping, because I feel that the elementary students are the ones most adversely affected by full distance learning. And I say that with, I'm sure I'll get a lot of pushback from high school parents as well. But, you know, throughout the state, throughout the country, that's what we're seeing. So I would like to see our elementary students somehow, some way in the fall come back 4 days a week in, you know, groups of 10 in a classroom, 10 to 12, whatever the classroom can afford with 6 feet in between. I'd like to see middle school students included in that if we possibly can. And trust me, I'd love to see high school kids back too, but I don't know how we can logistically do it. So we may have to go to 4 days of distance learning for them and 1 day in person. But that's my hope. Do I know that that will be the case? No. It could, we could go to a 2 day in, 2 day out. I mean, yeah, 2 day in, 2 day distance learning for everybody, and then all groups together on 1 day. I don't know how that would work because I'm concerned about consistency across the state. I'm concerned about families and daycare. But those are some of the things we're talking about. So what I can assure you of is there won't be full distance learning in the fall. I don't think. I think there'll be some in-person and some distance learning. There will be standards set for distance learning, and we will be providing additional, I hate to call it training, but professional development for all of our teachers in best strategies to use for distance learning.
Hi, coming to you from the chat here. This is Cheryl, and there are some questions about safety to the panel. Certainly social distancing, but does anybody have any information in terms of what will be done to ensure safety beyond just social distancing?
Yes, I can answer that for Connecticut. I can tell you that right now with summer school, at the present moment, you know, there is the social distancing. These are rules for summer school. There is temperature taking of all students and staff as they enter school. There is additional sanitation type procedures that are deeper. We are requiring masks for all children 5 and over and all staff members as well. We're requiring additional cleaning of bathrooms. We're requiring no more than 10 to 12 children on a bus at a time at this particular point in time. We hope that we can change that as we move on. But those are some of the precautions being taken. I can get into more of the weeds if you'd like to hear more of them.
Yeah, and Fran, I just posted, I know that the guidelines for summer school programming just got released this week, so I posted a link to that.
Okay, great.
And that goes into very comprehensive detail about what's being required of school districts that want to run a summer program.
That's correct.
They have to meet those conditions in order to then be approved to move forward. So I'm assuming that's a starting point for what would then come in the fall.
Yes, and I would also say to you that they are no longer guidelines, they're rules. I mean, so you have to enforce that in order to open summer school.
Thank you for that very important clarification.
Yeah.
Well, and one point I did want to make about some of the decisions around, I think there's rules around safety, and then you've talked a bit about guidelines for reopening, and knowing that we do have, I don't know that everyone on the call fully maybe would realize that we do have 169 plus school systems in our state, and each of them do operate quite independently. So while there could be rules that are required of all districts, there may be guidelines around best practices for distance learning that are more hopefully a North Star or a gold standard for districts to follow, but ultimately districts would be making some decisions at that local level.
Yes, but what I do want to say, because I'm also seeing the chat here, you're absolutely right, Shannon. And, you know, Jonathan is certainly the expert in that area of distance learning. But what I would say to you is what we are hoping for, and this is out of keeping with who Connecticut usually is, because we do have 169 independent districts, but we're hoping for one state plan across the districts in terms of how students return to school, whether it be 4 days a week or 2 days a week, whatever it is, because I think it will be incredibly difficult to have 169 different plans. Teachers teach in different districts. Parents are working, and if you have 2 kids in school one day and 2 kids in another day, there could be mass chaos. So we're hoping in this particular case for a statewide plan.
Thank you, Fran. So turning to Jonathan, you know, we've been going on about 3 months of remote or distance learning or online learning, whatever term you want to use. And so that's about a third of the traditional school year. And parents, I know myself included, we've just been kind of inundated with resources for helping with this transition, which at first I think felt like a relief that there were so many resources, but then it felt like a fire hose because we just got hit with, you know, and organizations, you know, like random retailers telling you what you could do with remote learning. So it was kind of coming out of the woodwork. So I'm wondering if you have a way to help parents know which resources are the most useful and high quality, kind of have been vetted in some way, and where could they turn to for those resources.
Thank you, Shannon. I think the most important thing in terms of safety and reliability is to try to use the tools that are provided by the district, by the teacher. I think the first line of defense is to try to work with the teacher of your children's, of your kids, to use the tools that they have available to them, and that you would use supplemental resources if you wanted to add to it. You know, there are a couple of things I wanted to pick up on from what Fran said. You know, the abruptness of the transition definitely had an impact on the schools and teachers' ability to thoughtfully enter into this world. Many of them were literally like with 24 hours notice. And so in the early days of that transition, for example, many districts got advice from their attorneys to not do live instruction because of the privacy concerns, looking into children's homes, looking into parent homes. I think looking back on that 3 months out, we see that probably as a mistake, that kids need that face-to-face. And I would imagine that when Fran thinks about what those standards are going to be in the fall, when we do go back, when there is distance learning, there'll probably be more live interaction between teachers and students next fall than there was this year, even in the remote realm. Beyond that, I think if you're looking at resources that come from places that have been approved from a privacy standpoint, the state has a wonderful list of software companies that sort of sign the privacy pledge and promise to not use any student data for commercial reasons. That's a good screen. Again, programs that help reinforce what the school is doing, what they are trying to help kids learn. And then beyond that, just things that work for your kids. You know, the abundance of resources is a blessing and a curse. There are so many, it's hard to know where to go, but kids know a lot about what works for them. And as long as it's an approved thing, if it's helping your child stay engaged, stay interested, then, you know, by all means, I would encourage you to do it. The other thing I would mention, and we see this a lot, is, you know, there's a lot of parent anxiety over what is being missed. You know, there's a sense that we're behind, that my child is missing benchmarks. They're somehow going to be dramatically disadvantaged by this, and we understand that anxiety. But people need to reflect on the fact that this is one of a truly historic event that has disadvantaged everyone. Yes, equity plays a role into how much you have been disadvantaged, But in general, this is a global slowdown of academic learning. You know, universities are making adjustments. They're not going to be requiring standardized tests. Standardized tests are not going to be given the way they were in previous years. You know, essentially the whole system is going to recognize that this interruption has affected everyone, and your child will recover. The school will recover. It's going to be slow. As Fran said, it's not going to look the way it looked in 2019 in the fall. It'll look something like it, but it will recover. Your child will recover. And there is no expiration date on a child's ability to learn something. They will catch up, and we will all do it together. Essentially, adults, if they have anxiety about this, need to remember that they probably are ending up transferring that anxiety directly to their kids. And the first thing when we do get kids back that we want them to think about is, we're together again, we're learning again. We are not going to be talking about what you lost and how far behind you are. We're going to be talking about taking you where you are and helping you get to where you need to be in a reasonable amount of time as best we can. Thank
you, Jonathan. Just a follow up on that for both probably you and Fran. While it is a universal situation, we do know that there will be many students impacted more than others just because of pure access to devices and connectivity in particular. So how, I guess twofold question. One is, how are you thinking of guiding districts with non-online or non-screen-based learning resources? Is that kind of a separate place? Do you go to a separate place to find those resources? And then secondly, how are school systems or the state, or will this be something that's part of the conversation, thinking about how to assess what loss occurred so that we know our baseline starting in the fall relative to the individual student?
Well, I think the primary focus of assessment in the fall is going to be formative in nature, helping teachers get information so they know where that particular student is, where that particular class is, so they can help bring them forward for where they are. I would hope that there will be a moratorium of some degree on a standardized testing format that tests everybody against not a randomized standard, but a set standard, because we know what the results of that is going to be. It's going to be kids are not where we thought they would be at this time because they had their learning interrupted. So it doesn't make any sense to traumatize an entire generation of kids by saying, well, welcome back to school. Here, sit down and take a test. But what will happen is they will enter into conversations with their teachers. They will do prompts. They'll do exercises in class that help that particular teacher understand where that particular student in that particular class is. They will then make a judgment as to where they are on the district's curriculum framework and work to create plans to help them move forward from that point. So I think the emphasis will be on formative assessment that helps accelerate learning versus standardized assessment, which really won't give us any new information that we wouldn't have already known if we didn't give it.
And I absolutely agree with Jonathan. And one of my worst fears is that we greet the children at the door and say to teachers and children, oh my goodness, you're so far behind, how are we going to catch you up? I just do not believe that that is the way we need to enter this. First of all, I think we need to build on what kids have learned during this time and some of the wonderful resources they've gone to and how they've learned together. And I want to learn from them some of what they have absolutely experienced. I mean, I watched my grandson the other day debating online, doing a whole debate. I mean, there are amazing things that have happened. And to the other point, Shannon, that you talked about, the equity piece and those that have not been connected, and what do we suggest for those that don't have online learning? I have to say to you that I've really done a lot of thinking about this, having come from Bridgeport, knowing that there are many of the students that, and I think it's undermeasured. I think there are many more students than we know that are not connected right now, and for a variety of reasons. But I think if we truly believe in equity, then we can't have two standards. It's no longer okay to have a paper standard for these kids. We have to ensure as a state that every child is connected. People have been very innovative about that. Philanthropists have come forward. I don't want to stop until we know that every child has the ability to plug into online learning. It doesn't work otherwise, and we have to be prepared for this. I mean, I'm not sure we're never going to see this again. I'm not sure we're not going to close down in late fall again, and we need to be ready for that right now. The other piece that I feel very, very strongly about is that we have to adapt our online learning to smartphones. We've got to know that that may be their way of connecting. And I'm a technology immigrant, trust me. I'm not as comfortable as many of you are with it, but I've had to learn a lot, and I have learned an incredible amount, and I see the power in it. And somebody asked on this chat line whether we would have snow days anymore. I don't think so. I think we will have the ability to know, first of all, when weather is going to not be good. And I think we can plan and have online learning. So it's going to be part and parcel, integral part of our schools. And it is absolutely non-negotiable that every child in this state must be connected.
I thank you. Those words are music to my ears, because I think we can't accept anything less than that, and we need to strive for that in order to ensure all students are prepared for the future, for the now, really, quite frankly, and the future. And then I really appreciated Jonathan's comment earlier that there is no expiration date on a student's learning, and I think that sort of pushes on the entire way we frame and think about education and the kind of constraints we've put on it so far. And now we're really pushing on those kind of social constructs that have been created. So it's exciting. It can cause a lot of stress and apprehension, but it can also be very exciting to think about how this might push things into some exciting new directions. Justina, so the focus of this webinar was really to help working parents thread that needle between this new clashing reality of work and school. And parents are still delivering their work to their employers, trying to do it in as high quality a manner as possible. And some are doing that from home. Some have to leave the home and maybe leave their child with someone, or even alone themselves. So now that parents are grappling with what the summer is going to bring, and even looking ahead to the next year, are there coping strategies for parents that you might recommend for navigating all of this successfully, or to a better extent, for the children as well as for themselves?
And Justina, as you're formulating your answer to that, from the chat, from the Q&A, there was a question about the impact on young children in an environment where there will be many people wearing masks and not being allowed to be near others. So perhaps that's part and parcel of where you're going, where you can go here.
Sure. Let me see if I can address both of those, and I may circle back to the second question as well. I mean, first, I think, and there was something, I was scanning the chat, there was a comment from, I think, a parent who was also feeling this pressure, right, of having children who don't seem motivated to get online, and also having to be pulled in lots of different directions work-wise. So, I mean, first, I want to say I very much empathize with that stress and that situation right now. And I feel like I'm in a more fortunate situation that I can work from home, that I'm not an essential worker. And yet, it is so incredibly difficult for working parents right now, and I want to acknowledge that. I think, you know, one, I don't have a quick fix to how we're going to deal with balancing childcare and work. I think this is kind of exposing a much larger systemic solution that all of us are going to need to work on together. But I do think one of the biggest reminders that we are talking about with SEL at this time is that it is a lifelong process for both children and adults. And so right now, for parents especially, it's so important to pay attention to your own social emotional needs. And on a basic level, right, I think we need to be thinking about our own self-care as parents, which includes getting enough sleep, finding time to take meaningful breaks, fostering the relationships and connections with friends and loved ones, and also seeking out mental health support when you need it. Our website, Castle, has a number of resources right now, like webinars you can join for mindfulness practices and coping and breathing and things like that. So I won't get too much into that. A couple other things I'll just say. One, I think if you are in a position to, and I recognize not everyone's in a position to, but this is also a really ripe time, just as we're talking about, you know, maybe this is a time to rethink what we're thinking in the education system. I think this is a ripe time to advocate for what's going on in work when we're asked not to bring our whole selves to work, right? And I think that means acknowledging at a workplace that this isn't business as usual, and to the degree possible that we are providing and creating space in our work environments to be able to talk about how we're feeling in this moment, connect with our colleagues, find support from other adults who are in similar situations, and really kind of work together to co-create some creative solutions for dealing with these strategies. I think that's one thing we can do. Regarding children and kind of the stresses that they're going through, I think a couple things. One, I want to take the pressure off having to fully engage your children in activities throughout the day. I think in many ways we have been potentially an overly adult-led society in communities and homes and schools, and this is an opportunity to really explore what it means to be student-led. So I think there's concerns about like, oh, my students don't feel motivated to get on, and motivation is really, right, when children derive meaning and value from their work they're being asked to do. So I think this is an opportunity to think about what are the interests of children and what do they want to research, learn about, talk about, and let them kind of lead the way. There's actually some research benefits, right, to children being bored, because it helps them kind of access their creativity and be more self-directed and explore what they're interested in. And I think we should be advocating for that in how teachers also facilitate online learning to be responsive to that. So I think it's finding a balance that works for you and your family. I think in regards to the questions about how to support and help children, especially young children, and I have I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, almost 6-year-old. Right now, how to help them kind of cope with the mask wearing and the physical distance and pieces like that. One, I think it's important not to pathologize, you know, not to create a scary situation for them. It can seem scary if we're all wearing masks, or it can seem fun. It can seem like a costume. It's in how adults, we as adults, parents and educators and community members are framing this and supporting this for our children. So I'll just tell you very simply, for my children, can you hear me now? I think for my children who love to dress up in costumes, right? Like we've been framing masks as a costume that we're wearing when we go out to help keep ourselves safe. And we've been having conversations about what it means to be safe.
Thank you, Justina. And I would just note your point about kind of student-driven learning. I think the person who posed the question about their children not being motivated by a more static proposed plan from the district, kind of a set of lessons that the parent is expected to facilitate, or the student is supposed to self-facilitate, as opposed to any directed instruction from the teacher. We've really, I mean, I don't know if I should be admitting this, but we've thrown all that out the window. We kind of show it to our children at the beginning of the week, and then they decide if there's pieces of it they're interested in. And then otherwise, we kind of let them pick something they want to dig into deeper that week. And it's harder for the 5-year-old because she needs to work on reading, and we're not a skilled literacy instructors, and so that's just we've got to kind of figure that part out. But the 3rd grader has been able to find online resources. Scratch is a particular website created by MIT that's free coding instruction, and she spends hours on it, and she's doing things that I can't even begin to understand. And to watch her be excited by that learning, as opposed to it being compliance-based learning, is very exciting. And it sticks. Like, it's got a stickiness to it that she remembers and recalls this information, as opposed to something that feels like a more remote rote memorization exercise. So I know none of this is ideal, but I think that there's opportunities. Yeah, Jonathan.
I just think 2 things from the chat, and also from that conversation. I think now is the right time to reflect on how we improve the remote learning situation, because we know we're going to have to in some aspect in the fall. But I would really encourage us not to think about this as the right time to rethink all of education, because there's enough challenge and ambiguity, as Fran pointed out before. We're trying to figure out how to get as many kids back as safely as we can, given the health restrictions, and to maximize learning under those conditions. That's a complicated enough planning task to not layer on top of that. Let's rethink the entire educational system at the same time. In 2021, 22, we can take all the lessons learned from this, free of the health concerns, and have that discussion. But let's focus on how to do what we can do best for as many kids as we can, given the health conditions that we have for the fall. The other thing I saw in the chat was, parents asking about college scholarships and applications. And, it is when we try to apply the normal rules of any system to an abnormal situation, your brain is going to cramp up because they don't match. And the entire system is going to flex for this situation. You've already seen the UC public university system say, we are not going to require the SAT for the next 2 years. You've seen the AP is up in the air. The entire system is going to have to recognize that this is not normal, and their situations their guidelines, their rules are all going to flex. Because if they don't, people will ignore them. They'll say, well, that's ridiculous. How can we do that? They didn't have the test. How can we do X? They didn't do Y. So I think we all have to take a deep breath and understand that the entire system is trying to respond, and guidelines and rules that were created for a situation that no longer exist. So we have to create new ways of responding and being flexible as we go forward. And I think just as we're asking families and parents to do that, the entire system is going to have to do that as well.
I couldn't agree more, Jonathan. And I would say to you that sometimes this time is incredibly difficult, because I will tell you, I spend 12 hours a day, every day, just trying to figure out how to create optimum conditions for learning for as many children as possible, and how to bring them back into brick and mortar schools safely. And it is incredibly complex, and there are so many things you have to consider. as we're doing that, that frankly, as much as I am devoted to teaching and learning, this is almost, first on the scope of things. We have to get this straightened out, and then we can move forward. And one thing I want to pick up on in Justina's, what she was saying, I do believe, and I'm picking it up on the chat as well, I'm hoping that as we transition, the social and emotional learning can be an integral part of every child's program as we move forward. We absolutely need it. And I was struck by one of the things on that I heard about teachers and leaders, for example. We do feel that we have to be the voice of optimism here. And I am incredibly optimistic about what our educational system is going to look like. But we also have to be aware that people are fearful and people are anxious. And I think we have to accept that and recognize their feelings and take them from there and hopefully lead them into optimism. But I think it's a mistake not to recognize where many of our students and staff and families are. I think that's incredibly important.
And I would just add that if I was in a public space looking at my school district, understand the challenges that they face in coming up with a plan to go back. Because the only plan that would make everybody happy is 2020 September looks exactly like 2019 September. And we know that is simply not going to happen. So it's going to be disappointing for everybody based on that. And in every community, there'll be a small group of people who think it's an overreaction and we should all go back as normal. And there'll be a small portion who won't go back at all because until they are safely vaccinated, they don't feel safe. So it's going to be this U-shaped disappointment curve, and district leaders and school staff are going to have to help work through that. And it's just an incredibly challenging place to be for them, as it is for families at home. So, the best advice is to just look at Justina's resources, help yourself feel better about the situation, and work together as best we can to make the most of what this really challenging situation is.
Thank you both. And sort of a related question that sort of has come up through the thread of the comments in the chat. Just one last question about kind of practically speaking, since we're hearing about such a wide range of experiences, and there is this goal, as Fran mentioned, to kind of move towards better guidance and better core tenets of high quality distance learning. But in the meantime, if a parent is finding that their particular experience leaves much to be desired or is falling short of what they need for their student, whether it's because there's not enough support or there's not enough challenge. We're getting some questions about students who have kind of caught up with the lessons that were provided, and now what are they supposed to do? What advice do you have for them? What can they reasonably ask of educators and system leaders at this time?
I don't think that what they ask of them should be any different from what they asked when we were in person. If they're having difficulty, or, I did see the talented and gifted piece on there, I think they should feel free to reach out to their child's classroom teacher and hopefully be able to resolve some of it at that level. If not, you move on to the principal and so on. But I don't think you should stew in it, so to speak. I think you need to take some kind of meaningful action. And I would say, how can I just want to be very honest here and say, I'm not sure that we have found the way to meet every child's need, whether we are in remote learning or in-person learning. I think we have a ways to go in that, and we have to continue to figure out how to best do that. I go back to my days as an elementary teacher, and I think that I did a great job with the kids who were on level and for the kids who were below level. But I'm not sure I did well by Paul, who was absolutely gifted in mathematics. And I think that we need to find better ways to ensure that we are meeting every child's needs. And that hasn't changed. I think we haven't done that as well as we can. But I will say one thing, and technology and the ability to access it in meaningful ways gives me great hope to better be able to meet every child's needs. It's a wonderful vehicle to get there.
I also think, just to add on to what Fran's saying, I think absolutely reach out to teachers, reach out to principals, and ask for specific things that you want to see happening. So I think, some of the things bubbling in chat, which I think are really important, right, is like, if all you're getting is full group instruction that's not differentiated, that's an assignment that's shared, right, like propose to the teacher, hey, instead of doing a full group instruction 5 days a week, can we split it up and have small groups or individualized time on some of those days? And the other thing, I think it's not just kind of asking for what you need from teachers and principals. I think in the long run, it would be really, I would love to see both parents and schools lean into kind of shared problem solving, shared decision making between parents and schools. I think right now, right, like what we're seeing is like this idea of school family partnership is more and more prominent and more important. And so I think that's one push that we should be making together. And then the other thing I just wanted to add about that too, I think like also be paying attention to SEL, again, to the social and emotional needs. I think, of course, we're all concerned about academics, thinking about where they are challenged academically, but also know that academic learning is inherently a social and emotional process. And in order for students to feel productive, in order for them to lean into academic learning and to be engaged, they need to feel like they have the relationships, their emotional needs are met, etc. So if you're seeing, our students aren't engaging in these various ways academically, what you might want to be paying attention to is how is the classroom set up to build and foster connections? How is the teacher building a relationship with your student? And how are you kind of helping to promote your student to think about their own personal goals and what they want to achieve?
And to that end, recently the State Department of Education has reached out through a tool called Thought Exchange to students statewide. And about 18,000 of those students have responded, grades K through 12, about 5 through 12, about what they would suggest to improve remote learning if it needed to be part of the fall. And there's a rich data set around what kids want, and they want interaction. They want to see their teachers and see their friends, and they want quality work. And we have a really good sense of where kids are as we try to improve some of the practices that we're going to be implementing in the fall. So I give the State Department of Ed and Commissioner Cardona a great deal of credit for having the courage to reach out to kids directly and ask them, how's it going? And we are using the results of those student voices to help guide some of the improvements for the fall. So it won't be perfect, but it will be better.
Well, I think this conversation could continue on for quite a while. I think our questions continue to come in the chat box, but I do hope that we've addressed some of the high-level concerns and know that we are committed to sending out to those who registered for the webinar a set of any links that were referenced and other resources that perhaps the panelists want to share with us afterwards or that were shared by participants. We know we're not alone. None of us are alone in this, and I think we want to make sure that there's a sense of community and support. And I want to thank all of the attendees for making the time to be here. I know that you're inundated yourselves with Zoom calls. I think I could be on 10 Zoom calls at any given time these days. So you have to make some careful decisions, and I hope that you found this worthwhile. And if your question was not answered, we will at ReadyCT do our best to follow up in the coming days. And see if we can get our panelists to respond, or we will respond directly. And just again, a reminder that it was recorded, the session, and will be available on the ReadyCT and CBIA websites. And then last but definitely not least, I want to give a special thanks to our panelists, Jonathan Costa, Fran Rabinowitz, and Justina Schlund. I think deeply appreciate you making the time, especially in the midst of this ever-changing state of education, and for your candor and authentic response to things, because there were things that we still just don't know the answer to. But we're committed to continuing this conversation, and if there's a case to be made for doing something again like this middle of the summer or towards the beginning of fall, we will look to put another event together. So thank you for everyone who joined, and to our panelists, and to Cheryl for queuing up all the questions, and our CBAIA colleagues, Shannon King and Katie, for supporting the technology on all this. And I hope you all have a very wonderful afternoon.